languages that people should stop sort of celebrating, stop applauding, be quiet, go back to the sort of the calm, more dignified order of the Mass. And I know under John Paul II, and I think we saw it in some of his travels, there were some moments when there were Masses with dancing, with all sorts of native music and things like that, which some people thought went too far. And certainly Benedict XVI probably would have said it went too far. And I think what we saw today was a Benedict XVI moment, as you said.
Well, you know, purists in the Catholic world often kind of felt ambivalent about many of John Paul's public Masses because they were kind of a cross between, you know, an act of devotion and a pep rally and sometimes a Broadway musical like Cats or something, you know, and of course part of that was just the emotions John Paul generated from the people. I mean, some of this wasn't scripted. I mean, a lot of times it's kind of cheering and applauding and chanting. You remember those famous chants of Giovanni, Paolo, you know, John Paul II, we love you. You know, right, I mean, reminiscent of the Super Bowl or something like that. I mean, that welled up spontaneously in the kind of emotional reaction that John Paul elicited. Now, Benedict XVI is, of course, a bit more of a traditionalist. Now, part of that is his humility. He wants the focus here to be on God and on the Mass, not on his own person. But in any event, it is clearly a different, more reverential, more sober, if you like, kind of style.
So we'll watch the traditional Mass here now as that unfolds.
John Allen, Jim Bitterman, as we watch this live from St. Peter's Square, I would remind people of something that you remember very well, both of you. It took a miracle to bring John Paul II to this stage, to this beatification, and it's particularly resonant because he believed that his own life had been saved in St. Peter's Square by a miracle, by the intercession of a saint. And it was that day back in 1981 when he was nearly killed by an assassin, and he really believed that on that day there was a miracle to save his life. John Allen, can you tell us about that?
Yeah, that's absolutely right, John. May 13th, 1981, as you say, is the day when a Turkish gunman, Mehmet Ali shot at John Paul II, nearly killing him in the square. As it happens, May 13th is also the feast day of Our Lady of Fatima, a reference to the famous, what Catholics regard as the famous appearance of the Virgin Mary in Fatima in Portugal. John Paul was a great devotee of Our Lady of Fatima. He believed that on that day, the Virgin Mary, in effect, altered the flight path of the bullet in order to save his life and preserve him in office. Part of his deep faith that the events of his life were not just part of human history, but they were also part of divine history. It's also worth adding, John, that 2 years later, in December 1983, John Paul II went to Rebibbia prison here in Rome, where Ali Achka was serving his Italian sentence, and embraced him and offered him his forgiveness. And I think that is one of those iconic moments that made John Paul a point of reference, not just for the Catholic Church, but for the entire world. And they saw this utterly, if you like, spontaneous act of forgiveness and reconciliation offered by a pope to the man who had tried to kill him. I think that is one of those moments that really cemented John Paul as an icon of his times.
Now, it's worth noting, just for people who are wondering whatever happened to his would-be assassin, he served his time in an Italian prison. He was freed. He returned to Turkey, his native Turkey, where he was jailed as well in connection with another crime. But he was subsequently freed there as well. So as we watch this ceremony unfold in Rome, he may be watching along with us a free man. A man remembered, of course, as the would-be assassin, the man forgiven by John Paul II, now free.
Bojaźń ogarniała każdego, gdyż apostołowie czynili wiele znaków i cudów. Ci wszyscy, co uwierzyli, przebywali razem i wszystko mieli wspólne.
If you're just joining us, you're now watching the celebration of Mass in St. Peter's Square in the Vatican with an enormous crowd, maybe 1 million people, maybe more, who gathered for an extraordinary event that we saw just a short time ago, the beatification of John Paul II. The late Pope has moved one step closer to sainthood, just one step away, on the basis of so much faith, so much devotion, so much support from within the church, but also the attribution of a miracle I think you'll see in a moment in the videotape that we were showing a moment ago, if that was videotape, the nun who believes, that's her in the white, that is Sister Marie-Simon Pierre Normand, who believes that the intercession of John Paul II saved her life, cured her of incurable Parkinson's disease. She not only testified to that fact, she has not only proclaimed her conviction that she believes she was saved by miracle, but she was seen again on this day, part of that small procession, presenting a relic, a vial of John Paul II's blood to Pope Benedict XVI, after Pope Benedict proclaimed the beatification. An extraordinary thing, an extraordinary thing. I am still struck by that. For so many people watching that, Jim Bitterman and John Allen, that blood it's part of what makes this, I think, to many people outside the Catholic Church, such a unique, I dare say, exotic process. The element of the magical, the mystical, the veneration of the relic of the late Pope's blood, the veneration of his body, which has also been exhumed and the coffin put on display.
Well, I should say, John, that in fact it's pretty common throughout the Catholic Church. Just down the street from my home in Paris, I'm right very close to the Church of the Miraculous Medal, and there are two nuns' bodies, the relics of two nuns that are venerated there, and I think you see it in Catholic churches around the world. It's a part of making the church tangible, yes?
Well, sure, Jim. And of course, this being the Catholic Church, we actually have a classification system. So there are relics of the first class, which are pieces of a saint's body or the clothing that the saints wore. The relics of the second class would be other items habitually used by the saint, and then relics of the third class would be anything that has physically touched relics of the first or second class. Now, obviously, the blood we are seeing this morning is a prime example of a relic of the first class, something that came from within John Paul's own bloodstream. But you're right, at bottom, what all this is about is that Catholicism is a sacramental tradition, which means that the visible, tangible things of this world are symbols of the supernatural. They point you beyond this world. Many writers talk about the Catholic sacramental imagination, that we can't just have abstract concepts, we need to see real stuff as reminders of what our faith is all about.
That blood, by the way, John, I don't know if you mentioned it before, but the blood was actually drawn from John Paul's body shortly before his death. Was on standby for use as a transfusion and never was used.
Tell us more about what is going to happen to his remains, because they have also been moved.